Purpose is a place where what you are good at and what you enjoy doing and what the world needs, where that meets each other. Politics has always remained a national affair.
Reinier, what would you consider, from a work point of view, your passion?
So Volt is the first pan-European political party. You are asking why nobody's doing anything. You are somebody. Why aren't you doing anything? I was like, well, actually, it's a question. Let me do something.
Given the extensive history that is in Europe, whether that ideal, even though nice to imagine, is even possible.
All major changes in history have started with a couple of people that said, let's do it differently. It made me realize that I was in my 20s trying to put everything at once in my career. So what's the best tip or trick to maintain momentum? Ooh, okay. Feels weird to share this in a podcast, by the way, but...
Reinier, I start all of my podcasts with the same question in order to establish how, or usually it establishes how the rest of the conversation is going to go. And that question is, are you happy?
I would say in general, I'm a happy human being. But to be totally honest, 2 weeks ago or less even, someone who was very dear to me passed away in a tragic accident. And that is all encompassing now. So the day before that, I was actually quite happy. But since that happened, his absence has created a sadness that overshadows everything else for now.
My condolences, first of all.
Thank you. Feels weird to share this in a podcast, by the way, but yeah, it is what it is. It's the truth. Yeah.
What has that occurrence, how has that trend, like in what way do you notice that has an effect on your happiness?
I think...
Are you even willing to talk about it, by the way? Or?
To be honest, I'd rather move on to other parts. Yeah. Still quite fresh. Yeah.
I get that. What, in your opinion, is required to live a happy life?
I think for every human being it can be different. What works for me is that I thrive on interaction with other people. So I want to be in a lot of social settings, and I think that in life what I try to do to have happiness is one, like physical development, as in playing sports. I love to play football. I love to go running, boxing, snowboarding, if I have the opportunity. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen that often. So one is physical. One other element is like social development, meeting new people like you today. A third element is intellectual development, where, I'm very curious. I want to learn more about why the world works the way it works. And that is something that if I lose that element in my life, my happiness decreases. And then I think the fourth and fifth one are creative development. So that can have many different forms. People often associate creativity with, painting or making music. I'm not good at both of those things, but there's other forms of creativity that one can also have, either in cracking jokes or just visiting musea and being inspired by the creativity of others. And the fifth element is, I think, certain spiritual development. So if I cover those 5 elements in my routine, then I'm happy. And of course, relationships with my girlfriend, my family, my friends. That's what brings me joy.
Do you think we should chase happiness?
I think the pursuit of happiness is is a good thing, because you're here anyway. So why not make the most of it and enjoy it as much as possible? So I do think the pursuit of happiness is a good thing, but if that is your only goal in life, then at least to me, that is a bit too hedonistic, too much trying to get your primary needs covered as much as possible in the highest amount of enjoyment. But I think if you only chase happiness, you also miss the opportunity to help a lot of other people. And I think that's an essential part of life as well. So not only pursue your own happiness, but also use the opportunities you have to increase the happiness of others. And there's a friend of mine who does that by, for example, during Christmas, organizing a dinner for people that don't have anybody to organize Christmas, to celebrate Christmas with. So he invites random people to dinner that would otherwise be alone. And one of the people that came to his last Christmas dinner gave a short speech that ended with a quote that I found fun, which is, "If no one is smiling around you, be the first."
That's nice.
Yeah. What about you? Do you think we should pursue happiness?
I'm not certain yet. There is clearly a reason why I obviously ask that in my podcast, especially as I try to understand the relationship between happiness and also work. I think the question was brought about mainly because hearing so many people, or not even hearing, but seeing so many people be unhappy with their job, something that takes up 80% of their week. To me, it doesn't make sense how people can stay in that if you are unhappy. Hence why I try and ask from different people who, as an outsider at least, seem like they are happy in their job. How do they think about it? So I'm still working on it. I'm not sure yet. I think I agree partly with what you say. Like, to some extent, chasing happiness could be endless. There's probably always something that's going to make you happier. But as said, I'm not certain yet what I believe, actually. For this podcast, I have a guiding research hypothesis.
Okay.
And that
interesting
hypothesis is that passion gives purpose.
Yes.
What is your opinion on that?
I think there is definitely an overlap, but I don't think passion fully gives purpose. Things I'm very passionate about, for example, playing football, doing snowboarding, yet that doesn't guide my purpose in life. And I think a purpose is a place where what you are good at and what you enjoy doing and what the world needs, where that meets each other.
Right.
And sometimes you can be passionate about something that you are not good at and that the world doesn't need.
Yeah.
And you told me you had about 23 interviews so far. Mm-hmm. And how has this hypothesis developed? Mm-hmm. Is it confirmed or not?
Or well, confirmed. I will probably need to do quite a few more in order to confirm it. But what is interesting is that I think so far there have been two people, if I include you now, that have disagreed. So okay. A lot believe yes. A lot mainly analyze that though from solely a work perspective. So in your case, you bring now hobbies into this, for example, such as playing football, which is indeed something you can feel passionate about. As far as I understood, if I understood them correctly, at least, is that they indeed also understand it more as like a work thing. And if they look at it that way, usually they tend to agree that at least being passionate about something, even if that specific passion has an end date, gives purpose to your life. And whether or not that contributes to a much grander thing, because that is something I at least have realized. I think we've pulled the context of purpose No, we've pulled the understanding of purpose out of context.
Yeah.
Meaning that often purpose to most people means some sort of life-changing idea that will change the world.
Yeah.
But it could also be enough to just take really good care of your family or your
of
loved
course.
ones
Yeah.
without changing anything in the world, but going into your grave, being known as a good human, that could already be a purpose. And I think that is definitely something I've learned from talking to these different people so far.
Yeah, and I often see that people are approaching this from a huge macro perspective, but I mean, if you are a good father, for example, I have a friend who's very dear to me, and he says, like, my life goal is to be a good father.
Yeah.
I think that's a super cool and worthy purpose to have in life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I especially like it on the topic of fatherhood, since by the time this podcast come out, it'll be known, but my girlfriend is pregnant.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Nice. I'm happy for both of you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So especially the topic of fatherhood is on my mind at the moment.
I can imagine.
So yeah, in regards to this passion topic, what would you consider, from a work point of view, your passion? Are you even passionate about what you do?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I'm passionate for multiple reasons. So one is I really believe in our cause. So Volt is the first pan-European political party. I wouldn't go into the politics too much because that's not what this podcast is about, but just 2-3 sentence explanation. We believe that only a Europe that acts together can solve the challenges of our time. For example, climate change, safety with regards to what's happening in Ukraine, growing inequalities, fair taxation, all those major challenges of the 21st century can only, in our opinion, be tackled by a Europe that integrates more and that is truly democratic. And we need to collaborate across borders because our problems are across borders. And I really believe in that mission. And I also see in society people that believe the opposite is true, that strive to more nationalism, that are right-wing populism that led to Brexit and the election of Trump, but also to the new government in Sweden and in Italy. And you can keep going like that for a while for each European country. So I'm worried about that trend, and I'm advocating for the opposite, and I believe many people will benefit from it if we are successful. So that gives an energy that's totally different from when I was working in the corporate world, where I worked the first 5 years of my career. At the same time, I'm a curious human being. And this work gives me the possibility to meet people that I otherwise would never have met. It gives me the opportunity to learn about a huge variety of topics. I'm a generalist. I love to know a little about a lot. That is an extra element why I enjoy this so much. And lastly, I'm passionate about working in an international environment with talented people that share that same belief. So those 3 elements really give me an extra sense of passion for what I'm doing.
Yeah. Why I especially found your story interesting was what you just mentioned already, the corporate part beforehand.
Yeah.
So before this, you were working at Ahold, which for those that don't know is one of the biggest, corporates in the Netherlands. They own Albert Heijn, among other things.
Yeah.
Ethos as well, I believe.
Yeah, it's like a multinational retail brand that's active in 40 different countries, but is mainly known in the Netherlands for being the mother company of Albert Heijn.
Yeah. So you were working in there, essentially in that particular job at least, had no experience in politics.
Yeah.
So what brought about that change?
Yeah, I think if you're... my advice to people who are hesitant about in the quarter life crisis, like about where they want to spend their time and what they want to be doing, would be do something, anything, do stuff, and then you'll find out what it can be. I really enjoyed my work at Ahold, and I was concerned about the direction society was heading in. We weren't able to deal with the migration crisis in a humane way, and I was ashamed by it. We are one of the wealthiest continents in the world, and we cannot help people in need. Plus, I saw this growing right-wing nationalism, and I was like, what? That's the opposite direction of where we need to go to. Why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And I had been walking around with that sensation, and then I met some people that said, well, actually, you are asking why nobody's doing anything. You are somebody. Why aren't you doing anything? Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, actually, it's a very good question. Let me do something. And I had some time over besides my job, because it wasn't like a 120-hour insane work week job, but more 9 to 6, 9 to 7. And I decided to volunteer a bit. And not only because I wanted to have a positive contribution to those problems, but also because I wanted to develop other skills, and because I thought the idea of a pan-European political party seemed so logical to me. I mean, we've developed democracy over hundreds of years, and we've come to 70 years of European integration, to challenges that are all transgressing borders, a lot of lives, a lot of companies, they are cross-border as well. It's logical to bring politics to that next level too. So I immediately thought, this is a good idea. It's in the direction that I want to support. Let me help out a little bit. One thing led to another, and before you know it, I was on national television as the leader of Volt in the Netherlands, explaining why I thought this was a good idea. And I was like, oh my God, if you told me 6 months ago that I would be here, I would have not believed you. It came as a bit of a surprise to me. But the first time we were in the newspaper, I got so many positive reactions from people that were like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. How can I help? All of a sudden, I was like, okay, we're not just a small group of like 10 people thinking this, but there's a broader need in society for this vision, and people want to contribute to it. So it grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the end, I decided together with Laurens Dasse to quit our jobs. He used to work at a bank, and we both quit our jobs to volunteer full-time for Volt, which was one of the scariest decisions for me in my life. I lived a year on my life savings, and at the time we had an office space that was actually someone's living room, and now we a couple of years further down the line have a bit more of a mature organization with 25,000 members across Europe in all EU member states, and have increased our impact. So that's how it can sometimes go.
Especially that first year, that sort of year that you're living off your life savings, you're slowly starting to see sort of your bank account decrease month after month.
Yeah.
What is the pressure, but especially sort of the conversation you have with yourself like then, that you're trying to tell yourself, keep going, right?
Yeah.
Because that, especially people who are trying to or want to chase a passion, who have that part figured out, that is one of the biggest sort of held back.
Yeah.
So
for example, my brother quit his job to start a company. And so he's like, okay, I'm quitting my job and I'm now going to start on starting a company. I think that's very courageous, and I wouldn't dare to do it that way. But the way I did it, I was next to my job at Ahold. I worked 30 to 40 hours a week on building Volt as well, until that became unsustainable. But I did know that Volt had grown to a level that, regardless of the outcome of this adventure, whether we would be successful in the elections or not, whether it would still exist a year later or not, I knew for a fact that it would be a massive learning opportunity for me. And I think if you look at it from a work perspective, maximizing your learning curve is what you should try to aim for in like the first 10, 15 years of your career, maybe even your entire career, but that I don't know yet, because I'm now about 10 years in. And I knew that by quitting my job, I was going to be part of an adventure that I found meaningful, but that would also teach me so much that it would be useful regardless of where it would end. So that helped.
Knowing what you know now about yourself and you could go back, would you change anything? Would you have, for example, started doing a study on political science or?
Well, I studied law, and it was easy for me. At least it gave me the opportunity to do a lot of fun things on the side. So I don't regret my time as a student at all. I had a lot of fun and personal development as well. But in hindsight, studying philosophy or history would have been a way better match with my interests and my skill set. So, yeah, sometimes I think about that. Career-wise, I don't have those regrets. I really enjoyed working at Ahold. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. It was a cool company. I had fun colleagues.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a reason to leave.
No.
And still, I never regretted for a second making the decision to go full time for Volt. Because,
no.
Yeah, building something is so cool. That's actually another element that drives my passion, is to see how the effort of many individuals combined can lead to a bigger change in society, and that is so cool. That it drives me as well.
That's when you ask me if I see similarities in the interviews, especially, I've spoken to a mixture of creators, entrepreneurs, and well, now politics.
Yeah.
Even actors. They all say the same. They're creating something from nothing.
Yeah.
That is what drives them. That's the what makes them feel hungry and excited to get up every day. So
yeah,
it's interesting that you say that now.
Yeah, definitely. And then the impact we have, besides the creation of an organization, eventually you want that organization to have an impact in society, but impact in society can also be very the experience of an individual. Today I had somebody on Instagram who is from Spain who sent me a message. I just learned about Volt. This gives me so much hope. Being able that what we do gives somebody hope is such a cool impact already. Or there was a middle-aged woman who volunteered for Volt who was going to give a presentation about something, and she was very scared and nervous. And I asked her, like, are you sure you want to do this? Because it's good to go out of your comfort zone. That's where life starts. But if it goes too far, then it can also be a very unpleasant experience. And we don't want to force you into anything. Yeah. And then she said, I'm scared, but for the first time in my life, my passion for something is bigger than my fear.
That's, wow.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Wow. With being in politics in particular, you have to deal with a lot of people that disagree. A lot of people that think they know certain things better. It's always just a mixture of opinions. How do you manage, or how do you experience that in general?
For me, the world is not black and white. It's there's thousands of different colors with thousands of different shades. So I think that suits also with Volt, where we try to be nuanced and fact-based. And I experience it in a way that if you engage in dialogue and listen, becomes more interesting, because everything you say you already know. But if you engage with dialogue, then in dialogue, then you can still disagree with people, but you can disagree in a respectful way. However, on social media and stuff, it has a tendency to not be a dialogue, but a shouting match. Okay. And that can sometimes be unpleasant. But I think traffic is with some frustrated people, I think. So I experience it very differently, whether there's internal disagreements or external disagreements. because internal disagreements usually lead to dialogue and to a better understanding of someone else's position, and also a reshaping perhaps of my own opinion. I always love it when that happens, when you get convinced about a different opinion than you had before. I think externally that happens also. That's what we strive for. That's why I'm really active on social media and try to engage with people to have those conversations. Through text and online it's more difficult than in person.
Right.
Yeah.
I know you said you don't want to get too much into the politics, and I would agree.
I'm perfectly fine with that. I was just assuming perhaps...
You are correct. I also don't want to do it too much, but I am a little curious because, as you mentioned, no one has done this pan-European party yet.
Yeah.
And when I look at the history of how the European Union in particularly was started, I think it was originally built with the idea of being like a United States type approach, you know? Why, from your perspective, what you've experienced, hasn't that worked yet? And what is it that you guys now will do differently to make it work?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. Let me start by saying that European integration, contrary to what many people think, has been a massive success. Massive success. If you look at it historically, it's a diplomatic piece of art. We used to kill each other constantly. Now we talk and have increased living standards for the people on the European continent in a huge way. So it has created peace and prosperity for about, let's say, 50, 60 years. And then once we reach the 21st century, we actually see that a new type of European collaboration is necessary to deal with the challenges that come. Globalization and other trends have made a world where there's more transnational crises. And the European system that was built, the EU as we know it now, is not really made to deal with those crises. And what we see is that there's 27 different democracies that collaborate together. And what we advocate for is to have, on top of those 27 democracies, one European parliamentary democracy as well. At the moment, we see that those 27 democracies tend to, within a European context, focus on their national interests. And those national interests, because of the current system where one country can often veto changes, leads to a paralyzation of the entire continent. So there's a lot of untapped potential there. If we would become one European parliamentary democracy, which would have majority voting on those topics, then we would be way more effective in fighting climate change, in creating a fair and equal society, in dealing better with the income of refugees and migrants. That all would become easier if we have this one European parliamentary democracy. And that cannot exist, a democracy cannot exist without parties, without political parties. So we need European political parties for that as well. My sincere hope is that in the future, we will see way more parties like Volt that operate across Europe, but then, for example, one that is more conservative or one that is really socialist and or one that has another profile, because then we can have the difficult conversations about where we want to head to with our entire society on a level where it actually will have impact. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just processing.
Yeah, sorry, maybe I got carried away.
No, not at all. No, I'm just trying to think, because as an outsider, from my perspective, one of the main reasons why that sort of ideal of what Europe could be hasn't functioned yet is indeed the national interest part that you say, relating down to very different cultures, right? If you look at the US, again, not everyone is the same, but somehow there is a very big overlap in cultures there.
a Texan and somebody from Texas and somebody from California might be very different people, but they all pledge to the flag of America and also feel American.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just wonder, given the extensive history that is in Europe, whether that ideal, even though nice to imagine, is even possible. Because I'm not sure. I think we are getting more international, and indeed English is becoming easier, especially among younger generations to talk to. So I would like to hope that that is a possibility. And yet also what you say with sort of right-wing parties coming up in the UK, with Brexit, obviously in Italy, speaks against that almost. It almost feels like people are trying to become more patriotic, more for their own country.
For some people, that is true. But if you look at the opinion polls across Europe, then actually the vast majority is in favor of European integration, is happy about the fact that it exists, wants their country to stay in the EU. Right. So I also think that often we get the wrong image because there's a lot of attention to the group that shouts the loudest.
Right.
That's one part of it. Another part of it is that I think societies can thrive through diversity. So I actually don't think we need to have a similar I am super American feeling in Europe for the EU to be successful in the way that we envision it. And thirdly, even if it is unlikely, then it's still a cause worth fighting for. I mean, let's say that you have a passion for helping people who are homeless, for example. And you say, my goal is to eradicate unwanted homelessness in Europe by 2040. Then people will also tell you, that's not realistic for tons of reasons. There's about 3 to 5 million homeless people in the EU. How are you ever going to solve it? But still, it's super worth fighting for.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't do nothing, it definitely won't change.
Exactly. And I mean, all major changes in history have started with a couple of people that said, let's do it differently.
Yeah.
Or let's try to do it differently.
Another I'll try and make it my last political topic, because it also can't be avoided. One of the biggest developments over the past year is obviously Russia.
Yeah.
And the attack on Ukraine.
Yeah.
Within building a European party, one topic that in that case comes up is defense, building essentially a European army. Yeah. How do you imagine that developing? Should, I don't know, votes grow bigger? Would you build a European army? If so, how would you deal with that Russian problem?
Yeah, I think from the moment Volt was founded, we've always been in favor of each European country meeting at the minimum the NATO norm, which was spend 2% of your GDP on, at the moment, 2% of your GDP on defense, and most European countries did not reach that at all. On top of that, we've always been in favor of a European army, which can coexist with NATO. It has a lot of benefits, partly from also being able to buy equipment together, and with that also getting being more efficient in getting a better army for less money that then can be spent on, I don't know, education and healthcare. But also because we believe that in a globalized world, even France and Germany cannot have an army that is significant enough to really play a role in a geopolitical sphere. So we need to, in that way, collaborate a lot more. For me, this has to go hand in hand with changes in the EU, because it needs to be one European parliamentary democracy, so that we have democratic oversight over this army and how it is deployed.
Yeah.
What specialists say, I'm not a defense specialist, but I've talked to generals that say that building an army that way takes about 30 years. So if you are trying to ask yourself the question of, do we need a European army? Then you need to think about, okay, in 2052, Do I want a European army then? And also, if you look at it from that perspective, for me, then the necessity for having that European army also becomes higher, and then it should start now.
I wonder to what extent that is similar, that having an army also increases violence. Because I at least think the only example that comes to my mind is guns in America, right? If you compare, there is no other country where guns are used as much as in America, because there's simply free law on them.
Yeah.
Aren't you worried that by building this army, you therewith also instigate more violence as a result of it?
No, I don't think the comparison fully goes, because when you give a lot of individual human beings access to guns, then, for example, if somebody has a psychosis, they can use that gun. Whereas if somebody has a psychosis in the army, it's less likely to happen because there's a big institution and democratic oversight on it. And I would love to live in a world where armies aren't necessary, but history have shown that we are definitely not there yet.
Yeah. If
we are ever going to get there, so I think it's a necessity that we need.
Mm-hmm. Fair. Okay. Those are my political questions. Now I'm done.
I love talking about politics, so we can also talk about that for hours. Don't worry. Yeah.
No, I want to know a bit more about you, especially in relation to the topic of the quarter life crisis.
Yeah.
Would you say you had one?
Well, I've definitely experienced a period of restlessness. In my 20s, where I was extremely restless, and that had a variety of reasons, and I always thought that those reasons were the reason I was that restless. But then I spoke to some wise elder people who told me that that is typical for people in their 20s to be restless. And I think that that restlessness also led to a new period of figuring out who I am. You have this like sensation during your when you are like going through puberty that you're becoming more and more aware of who you are, and then in the beginning of your 20s, you're like, now I really know who I am. I'm grown, I'm adult, I know who I am. And then somewhere in my 20s, I had a realization like, oh shit, perhaps I don't know it all. Trying to find out who you are also relates to what you want to do in life. So I think that definitely contains elements of the quarter life crisis. And if one thing that helped me at the end of my 20s was, I have this friend, and his name is Ishem, and he used to work at a big technical company, big corporate in IT. And he had a colleague there that he really looked up to, who was very talented, a couple of years older, and who talked about his super high ambitions. And then he had his really high ambitions as well, and was like copying that friend that colleague that he looked up to. And then he once talked to a coach or like a psychologist, and that he expressed the same types of ambition, and the person was sitting across him was sort of laughing and saying, like, are you sure? Because it seems as if you don't really know yourself. And then 2 weeks later, the colleague that he looked up to so much committed suicide. So those experiences led him to sort of the foundation of that, on which his belief of what the world was and what life was about and who he was got shaken up like an earthquake. And then he did a long period of searching, and also like the quarter life crisis as you describe it. And he came to the realization that we tend to look at careers as linear careers. So you start somewhere, and then it linearly develops in that same field, and then you do it for 40 years, and then you quit. and retire. And he came up with something that he calls the episodical career. I don't know if he thought of it himself, but I really like it. So I copied it and attributed to him, where he said, if you think about the fact that you have about 40 to 50 years to work, then what you can do is actually look at all the things you want to do in your life and cut it up in pieces and have an episodical career instead of a linear career. So for example, if you take my example, I love to write. I think teaching is really cool. I might want to teach at some point in my life. I really like the corporate world. I'm now in politics. I would love to at some point build a company myself. So if you look at those elements, and you say, let's say there's 5 of them, there's a 40-year career, then I have 8 years for all. And if I want to do one part longer, then I know it will eat up on the other part. And looking at it from that way really helped me, because it made me realize that I was in my 20s trying to put everything at once in my career. So it had to be fulfilling. It had to have a nice work-life balance. It had to be a place where my talents thrived, but also where I learned a lot and where I was challenged. And my colleagues had to be super fun. And I also have an ego, so I was also hoping that other people would think it was cool what I was doing. And all those things together in one job, it's like so much that you demand of it, that maybe just the thought of being able to spread that out over 40 years can be comforting.
That's a really nice one. I hadn't heard it like that before. You touch on one of the most essential points of this whole quarter life crisis part that I research, is choosing what path to take. Is there any advice that you have when it comes to figuring out what your own path should be?
I think, in short, do something, and then you'll find out what you like and also what you don't like. Knowing what you don't like is very meaningful, because if you're like me, I like a lot of different things, so I find it hard to choose. And then finding out, oh, this is actually something I don't enjoy at all, can also help you get to where you want to be. I once had a couch surfer sleep in my place in Amsterdam, where I live, and he was from the United States, and he was working in this finance job, venture capitalist, after doing his master's in that field. And it was like the job that everybody desired, and a lot of people applied, but he got it, and he was doing it for like 1.5 years. And then he didn't like it. And what he found out is, okay, actually my biggest passion is playing squash. So I'm now still in my 20s. I can still try and become a professional squash player. So he got all his savings, focused everything on squash, and traveled the world playing squash tournaments. And he was like somewhere like number 140 of most professional, in the top of best professional squash players in the world. He was like number 144, which is super good, of course. But squash isn't a really popular sport that pays a lot of money. So when he was touring the world to visit these tournaments, he would couch surf, and then also ended up on my couch. He noticed that wherever he was, whether he was in Japan or in Amsterdam, that people would talk to him about, oh, I've always had this dream to do A, B, or C, but I've never pursued it. And you are pursuing your dream of being a professional squash player. That's so cool. So what has happened? And then he realized, like, okay, if this is like a universal thing that people struggle with, maybe we can find similarities. And he built a platform and wrote a book. His name is Mike Lewis, and the book is called When to Jump. And what it is about is basically him saying that often people know what they really want. And I think that's different from the quarter life crisis, because in the quarter life crisis, the way I experienced it is there's so many things. I'm in a luxurious position. Many people don't have that luxury, but
there's an overlap.
Yeah, people that have it, that are like, oh, there's so many options, I don't know what to do. But in his particular case, it was people that know what to do, but don't know when to really do it and how to approach really starting doing it. And then he wrote a book about it, which I can recommend. So if you know what you want but don't know where to start, then reading When to Jump by Mike Lewis is a good one.
Interesting. I'll be sure to add it to my book list.
Thanks. Do you have books that you enjoyed reading and that you recommend to people?
Yeah. Solve for Happy from Mo Gaudat.
Okay.
He was the former CEO of, I think CEO of Google X.
Yeah.
So, like the division of Google that does all futuristic kind of stuff. Super smart guy.
Is he the person that lost a child and then wrote a book?
That's the one, yeah.
I haven't read the book yet, but it has been recommended to me before.
The book is fascinating.
Yeah.
Essentially, to summarize the book, he basically creates a mathematical equation for happiness.
Okay.
So that's, he literally breaks it down like, this is how to be happy. And I think what I found the most fascinating about it and somehow made a lot of sense is that he basically says you are responsible for your own happiness. And a lot of people think that they're not. You know? Especially in situations where people are not like clinically depressed, because often that's an illness, but to a certain extent, the way your life goes, the way you feel, that is a result of things you tell yourself mentally. And if you are always, I think he gives an example. If you're in traffic and you're getting annoyed by the traffic, that's your choice. You're choosing to make yourself annoyed.
Yeah.
And I tried that with the weather in the Netherlands because, as you know,
it annoyed me this morning.
Exactly. In the Netherlands, it's gray, it's rainy for like 70% of the year. Yeah. And at some point, my girlfriend and I started doing it that we were like, no, we're going to be like, oh, it's nice and gray again. Be like somewhat excited about it. And what we noticed was that it does drastically improve how you feel about the weather, because you literally tell yourself, and it's a fascinating book. He goes into it that the thoughts that you hear in your head, those are actually not you. Those are just sort of things that your brain tells you. And you can tell your brain to go get yourself a different thought. Like you can say, hey, I don't want to think about this now, And so, that's definitely at the top of my list. The rest that I would...
definitely going to read it now.
Yeah. The rest I would recommend are more like things that get you from thinking to doing. So also interesting, but I feel like you're already quite a doer. So
it's also that's one of the things I realized in the past 10 years, especially with work, is that it's really context dependent. So when I worked at Ahold, where there was really a doer mentality, I was sometimes referred to as, oh, you're overthinking. You're thinking too much, Reinier. You're more a thinker than a doer. In the context of Volt, where there's a lot of smart people that have these amazing ideas about society and how it can be improved, there are more thinkers than doers here. And then people tell me, oh, you're really the doer. I think that's if you're listening to this and also wondering like, hey, I feel like I'm in or this is how people see me and also how I've started to see myself, then maybe in a different context, it could be entirely different.
Yeah. I have a new segment. You're the first person I do it with. And
okay, cool.
See this little jar?
Yes.
This jar is filled with questions that I collected from my community.
Cool.
What I want you to do is take one piece out at random.
Yeah.
Read it out, obviously, and then give your response to the question.
I'm gonna take this one. Should I also read who asked the question?
Sure, yeah.
Michael Forterra. I hope I pronounced it right. Forterra. What's the best tip or trick to maintain momentum? Ooh, okay. What's the best tip or trick to maintain momentum? I think for me, it's finding the people around you that add to your momentum. So, for example, I'm trying to write a book, which is quite a difficult process. I wrote a book before, but it took me 4.5 years. And one way to try and get the momentum into doing this is by expressing it, for example, now. And I was a bit hesitant because I'm afraid to say it out loud because who knows, maybe I will not finish it. And by saying it here, I'm building the pressure for myself. And then maybe if we meet in 2 years or whenever we meet again, you say, hey, how did the book go? And then that's an extra pressure for me. So that helps. But especially finding the right people around you that can help you with it. So having friends that are also interested in this topic and including them in the process. I think in the beginning of Volt, it was a group of volunteers, and you're with like 10 people, and they have different levels of engagement. And my thought was that, let's say number 1 has the highest level of engagement and number 10 has the lowest level of engagement. My thought was, okay, that person that is not really engaged, I should convince him or her to be more engaged. So cups of coffees, phone calls, WhatsApp messages, but after a while you see that that person is less engaged, and it's a really big energy drain for me to try and convince somebody that doesn't really want to be convinced. Then I followed this course about how to build social movements at a university next to my job, which Volt offered. And one of the main tips was, if you're in a team and you're trying to build social momentum, focus on the people that have the highest engagement. So I started using that, and instead of focusing on that number 10, I focused on that number 1 who was already super engaged. And every time I talked to that person, I got more psyched about what we were doing. And that person got also more inspired. And what happened? That person inspired other people who then became more engaged, who then inspired other people. So building the momentum, a good tip that worked for me is expressing that to people around you, trying to make them part of the process. And once they are, focus on the ones that are already most engaged and most passionate, instead of on the ones that are not really.
Good one.
Cool question, by the way. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, there were some amazing ones in there.
I'm curious, should we do another one? Or do we not have time?
Okay, go on.
Yeah?
Go and do another one.
This is fun, or am I now disrupting your new segment?
That's fine. We'll let you go.
Sure?
Yeah, go on.
Otherwise, we can cut it out.
Yeah.
Ed Best C says, in times of great struggle in the past, do you remember a specific thought that kept you going? Yes, I do. I think when I was 21 years old, my best friend passed away after a year of being very sick. It's weird that we also started with this, but that was 2 weeks ago, and this is 11 years ago now. I was very, sad and for years, and I missed him a lot, and I didn't really know what the meaning of life was, if it can end like that in such a short, after such a short time on this planet with us. And I read a book by Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he's a Jewish psychiatrist that was in Auschwitz. And he wrote about the meaning of life. It's a thin book. I can recommend that. And there are several thoughts there that kept me going. And one of them was, the question is not what the meaning of life is, because life is just there and nobody has that answer. But the question is, what meaning do you want to give to your life? And that helped me to ask the right questions about how I wanted to live my life. And with that, I sort of regained, I wouldn't say trust, but I regained joy in life and a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning. So that is a thought that really helped me through a difficult time.
Does that play into what you do today?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I think also taking risks like quitting my job, even though I didn't have a wife or kids or a car or a mortgage, which makes it less responsibility, so easier to make a decision like that. I would not have taken that risk, I think, without that past experience. And also, I would not have, I think, made a decision to dedicate the largest part of my life towards an idealistic cause that I believe in. Sometimes my mom says that that I might have done it also without that experience, but I do think it enhanced it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're at the last question of this
Okay.
podcast, and that question is, what does the future hold for Reinier?
So over Christmas, I made a decision that I want to try and become the candidate or one candidate for the European parliamentary elections. So work-wise, that's what the future holds for me. It depends on. So I'm now the co-president of Volt Europa. We have. Two co-presidents, and you can be co-president for 2 mandates that are both 2 years. I'm in my 2nd mandate, and end of this year that ends, and the year after is the European parliamentary elections. So this Christmas I decided, okay, I want to remain in politics, and I'm going to try and do that by becoming the candidate for the European parliamentary elections. First, it depends on what the Volt members want, because we're a democratic movement, so they will vote. Yeah. And if they vote me on that list, then maybe the society will also vote for me, and then I could be in the European Parliament for 5 years. But there's also a likelihood that that doesn't happen, and then there's lots of options, but I don't know why. I don't know what exactly it will be if that doesn't happen. And besides that, I hope to have fun and meet a lot of interesting people.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating. First of all, you're the first person in politics, but on top, just your general story. I think it's going to be very useful. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation too. And maybe one last shout out, if anybody who's listening to this is considering becoming active in politics, feel free to send me a message, a DM on Instagram or something, and we can have a cup of coffee and I can tell you more about my experience, and you can check out if it's something for you or not.
Awesome. Thank you.